So George Berkeley is a philosopher of the early 18th century. He's an important figure because he represents one way in which traditional Christians reacted to the Enlightenment. For this, he was admired even by such otherwise diverse but romantic philosophers as Coleridge, Schopenhauer, Henri Bergson. He was admired by the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, and in fact, Yeats had a kind of obsession with Berkeley. And this is telling because there have always been two Berkeleys that have come down to us from history. So one is the Berkeley who is the visionary dreamer, the one languishing in the portraiture that Yeats would have seen in the examination hall in Trinity College, Dublin. The other is the one that Yeats also eventually came to know, the real Bishop Berkeley, who eventually became the Bishop of Cloyne, the sober-minded and impressive intellectual who prepared a series of very methodical and scrupulous notes for what would become his major publications, and the propounding of his philosophy of immaterialism. These notebooks, or so-called philosophical commentaries, were just becoming available in the early 20th century. And there, when Yeats read them, he found the figure who he describes as recovering the world that Descartes, Locke, and Newton had banished. Berkeley recovers, and it's a world that Yeats says Berkeley is able to recover exactly because it exists only insofar as it shines and sounds. So here you right away you already grasp something of the key to Berkeley's immaterialism. Berkeley rejects the world of metaphysical abstractions. Matter in the early modern period had become something whose whole essence consisted in geometrical properties, extension, the occupation of space. The atomist hypothesis was revived from ancient Epicureanism. So you had essentially a semi-popular understanding of a world of matter in motion, matter moving through an abstract space. So you had a popular understanding of Newton's science as interpreted metaphysically in terms of a world of absolute space and matter moving through it according to precisely formulated mechanical laws. The reality, of course, of Newton's contributions is somewhat different. Nonetheless, this is how he was standardly interpreted, and it gave rise to, not directly, but came along with a current of emerging atheism, agnosticism, so-called free thinking, deism, and it's just in this world that Berkeley's education occurs and in which his early intellectual formation happens, mostly in reaction and in response. So he's born in near Kilkenny in Ireland in 1685. He was raised in Dysart Castle, which still exists to this day. He matriculated at Trinity College in 1700, and his early tutors were all Lockeans. So on the faculty there were figures like Peter Brown, William Molyneux, who corresponded with Locke. Locke's famous essay concerning human understanding had recently been published and would have been standard fare in the curriculum. So Berkeley is reading Locke, eventually graduates in 1707 with his BA. His early publications had been in mathematics, and of course he'd also studied Greek, Hebrew, logic, and philosophy. And he's waiting to become a fellow at Trinity College. He's preparing to sit for exams, but these exams are only given when there's a position available. So he spends some years, say from about 1704 to 1707, waiting for the examinations, and really it's during this period that he develops what will become his mature philosophy, his so-called immaterialism. And it comes to him through a combination of factors. So one is that he reads figures like Descartes and Malebranche. And these are figures who had revived Augustinian metaphysics. And from them, Berkeley takes the metaphysics of the human person as consisting in an immaterial soul in the first place, and only secondarily as an embodied organism. So he thinks that Descartes had given us an accurate understanding of what the human person is ontologically, an immaterial soul whose whole essence consists in thought or thinking. And from Malebranche, he takes the idea that the objects of sensation and the objects of understanding are entirely mind-dependent and represent the only things that we can know directly. The problem is that for Malebranche, who also believes in a world of abstract matter, as did Descartes, a world in which matter is taken to be something whose whole essence is geometrical and whose primary attributes are all geometrical properties. The problem is that for Berkeley, that world is not a world that we are directly presented with in sensation. It's a world that Malebranche thinks we can understand through the intellect, but Berkeley thinks represents a kind of abstract fallacy. So he thinks that, yes, the mind is capable of abstract operations as mathematicians practice them, but that this doesn't tell us anything about matter. It tells us something about our own ideas. If matter is then supposed to be something over and above our ideas, which are of course mind-dependent, then, as Malebranche himself conceded, this would be something we could only know about through a special revelation from God. And Berkeley thinks that's unacceptable. He thinks that on the one hand it makes God into a kind of deceiver, exactly what Cartesians will reject, what Descartes himself says God cannot be. And short of that, it makes us into skeptics. And in fact, Berkeley took the work of Pierre Bayle, an influential French philosopher at the time. He took Bayle's skepticism as being a kind of consistent development of Malebranche's position. But Berkeley won't go so far as to reject everything from Descartes and Malebranche. From them, he'll take the Augustinian metaphysics of the soul and the idea that all we can directly know are objects of the sense and of the intellect. Nonetheless, he'll make a careful move here, which is to resist what Malebranche does, which is to identify the real world not with the world that we know directly through the senses and through the intellect, but Malebranche will identify it with the world of abstract matter. Berkeley rejects that move. He says instead, the real world is the same world that we know directly through the senses and through the intellect. This is his real breakthrough, his eureka moment. It occurs roughly in 1707, where he comes back, as it were, from the influence of Malebranche and Bayle to a kind of common sense position that the real world just is the world of immediate sensory experience. So there are three things that Berkeley is juggling with in his head. One is the world that we know directly through sensory experience. The second is the world of matter, which is a world of abstract metaphysics. And the third is the real world. Which of the first two is the real world? Most of early modern philosophy had agreed in identifying the real world with the second option, the world of abstract metaphysics. And this is where Berkeley finds Pierre Bayle, the French skeptic, helpful. Bayle revives arguments from ancient Pyrrhonian skepticism against positions of abstract metaphysics, really any metaphysics whatsoever. The Pyrrhonian skeptic is content to follow appearances, so to speak. That is, he doesn't commit himself to positions that take him beyond what his senses report. If a building's on fire, he runs out of it. If a lion's chasing him, he runs. So Bayle influences Berkeley to the extent that Berkeley realizes that there's no need to commit oneself to the real world as being a world of abstract metaphysics. In fact, as Malebranche's case showed, that would require that to know that any particular thing exists, we would require a special revelation from God. And Berkeley thinks that pursued consistently will just lead to the skeptical position of Bayle. So what Berkeley will do is accept from Bayle the idea that the real world can just be the world of appearances, the world that we know directly in sensory experience, but refuse to concede that that's any form of skepticism. In fact, what Berkeley's done is restored us to the common sense position, not the position, of course, of educated common sense, which is going to go along with Descartes and Locke and Newton and accept that the world is a world of abstract matter. The position of everyday common sense, the vulgar common sense, if you like, is going to be content to follow appearances and to take appearances as the real things. So what Berkeley does in order to distinguish the real world from the world of dreams and fantasies and the imagination is to say that the real world just is the world that we meet with in sensory experience. But what makes it real is the way in which it's guaranteed to have the particular order and coherence that we find it has by God as its author. So God becomes the author of nature for Berkeley in being the one who decrees and issues laws about how human beings will experience the world. So Berkeley thinks he can identify the real world with the world of sensory experience because he says if you think about our sensations, if you think about the fact that they, first of all, they don't depend on our own will. So I don't voluntarily decide to have certain sensations. They impinge upon me. And furthermore, they have a kind of order and coherence. They have an organization, a way of unfolding over time in regular patterns that establishes a kind of thematic character, a characteristic set of appearances that we interpret as the world of ordinary experience. So an individual's subjective sensations, Berkeley says, possess such an order and coherence, such a constancy and intersubjective harmony that it could not be dependent upon my own will.